All right, welcome to the conversation. This is Guns and Ammo Buzz podcast, and today we're going to talk with James Sellers, who's founder and CEO of Sellmark. But first, this topic could go in a lot of different directions, but I kind of want to stay focused a little bit on thermal technologies. Tom and I both have some field experience with this. It dates back when I was a Marine. We started integrating thermals by the time we were invading Iraq in 2003. And my experience with thermals was a little sketchy at the time. It was somewhat of a new technology coming on. We were integrating them into our light armored vehicles, driving with them at times. There were some issues with depth perceptions and refresh rates and things like that made it a little bit more challenging. And we switched back and forth, driving at nighttime with night vision and, fighting between night vision and thermals. Never really had a chance to use thermals in, say, combat where we're exchanging rounds, mainly because I couldn't trust the technology to keep up with the action at the time. So night vision tended to be our predominant tool in the field. But, a lot of things have changed in 22 years now. And Tom, tell us a little bit about your experiences with thermal real quick, and then we'll get into where we're at today.
Well, similar with yours, Eric. I was on a Special Forces A team, and we had 4 thermals assigned to the team: 2 light, we called them 2 light and 2 heavy, and they were handheld. And I think one of those models you could mount to the crew served weapons, but again, they were large. Didn't seem like batteries lasted long, But you saw immediately the effects of thermal versus night vision. The only time we'd really use them is when we stopped for the night, and static emplacement, because, even on very dark nights, you could still pick up heat signatures. Oftentimes you couldn't really tell what it was, but you knew something was there.
So, why we're talking about this is that thermal technology used to be very expensive and out of reach for anyone if you didn't have a military credit card, or were not part of a large police agency. But now here we are. Like I said, we're 23 years later from the time I was in, and we can go to the local big box store and pick up thermals. But there's still a lot of need for education and understanding, and maybe even some of the people watching this or listening to this are curious, what would they use thermals for? But before we get into all that topic, we need to introduce James Sellers here. He's the founder and CEO of Sellmark Corporation, who's a global leader in outdoor lifestyle and tactical products. And in that Sellmark Corporation, you're going to recognize brands. They've got quite a number of brands here, and I'm just going to read them here. We've got Sightmark, Pulsar, Firefield, KJI, Bullet Safe, Inforce, and Dark 30. Dark 30 being the latest brand I've recently become familiar with. So yes, these products are used in the military. They are being used among law enforcement agencies. But the most excitement and energy seems to be coming from the outdoor industry and the enthusiasts here. James, you have an interesting biography. How did you get involved in all of these technologies and manage to bring these brands together?
First of all, Eric and Tom, it's a pleasure to be here with you and talking to you about this topic. Like you, I have been working in this field since 2003, actually, interesting, the same year. And the world's changed so much in those 22 years. The company actually started in 2000, but my background and passion for the outdoors started growing up in northern Michigan, enjoying the lakes and the streams and in the forests. I was always fascinated with optics. Always was interested in firearms, and I loved shooting. I grew up in a family where they felt it was important that you learn how to use a firearm at a young age and use it safely and proficiently. We were always taught to shoot with iron sights, which was nothing wrong with that. It's the basics of marksmanship. But I always wanted to buy scopes and sights for my rifles, and my family wasn't super enthusiastic about that. But the first chance I got, when I put that first magnified optic on a rifle, it was amazing. What you can see and do and how much more accurate you can be. And ever since then, I've been hooked on, what optics can do to enhance the experience, out in the field, and just been a big fan ever since. So You know, in 2000, when I started the company, we actually started as a marketing company with sales consulting, and we had a pivot. So when we pivoted, we decided let's sell outdoor products. Let's get people outdoors. Let's help, you know, further that American tradition of the great outdoors and hunting and shooting. And so we started in actually outdoor products such as like tactical vests and fur hats and striped shirts from Russia, of all places.
Oh.
And what's interesting about that time frame and in those early days, you know, Russia was seen as a potential ally of the U.S. and a new global partner in capitalism, and we were all excited, thinking that, you know, it was going to be us walking together with them and prosperity. And it didn't work out that way. But in the early years, what's fascinating, you know, with you both coming from a military background, the Russians' mentality of warfare kind of initially drove the American outdoor experimenting into night vision. So in those early days, I was in Russia and, you know, looking for products, and they had all these huge factories with PhDs and engineers, a lot of them unemployed, looking for things to do. And in those days, the Russians kept making stuff after the military moved on to new technology. So in 2003, we were dealing with tube-based night vision. So if you use PVS 14s, PVS 7s, maybe before the thermal, which was an intensifier tube, which essentially was an electromagnetic chemical based optical system that would take light, turn it into electrons, and amplify the electrons. Then it hit a phosphor screen, and that would be the image. So very old technology, but very effective. To this day, they still use that for low light operations. So anyway, my background started actually looking at was kind of old relics of, you know, the 70s and 80s military production in Russia, and how do you take this technology and how do you make it available to hunters? So that was the original kind of the start of our involvement in the night vision industry way back in 2003.
So about what time did you start noticing a major shift and some interest in thermal technology versus night vision?
You know, you're right. I mean, thermal was out there. It was out of the reach of the market. And we've seen some thermal products. They were very clunky. They were very archaic design. The interfaces weren't good. There was the electronics part of it really wasn't in play. But the basis of the technology is basically you have we have electromagnetic spectrum of visible light and invisible light. And our eyes are good at the visible light band, but there's other wavelengths. And, the infrared is what you emit is heat. So to make it as simple as possible, what thermal does allows you to see heat of an object. And now the technology, you can see it miles away, which is fantastic. But in those early days, the systems originally required cooling, and they were quite large. If you look at the 80s and 90s systems, are massive and very complex. And I think, as late as the 90s, I think there were hundreds of thousands of dollars for some of these thermal systems.
Right.
By the time that you were using it in Iraq, you were in Iraq, is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You guys did a hell of a job there in Iraq, and having that technology really, if you did engage troops at night, you had a superiority. You owned the night in Iraq, and at that time, the U.S. was the only large-scale capable military in the world that was able to operate 24/7. So, night vision, as the Americans had the Gen 3 and the thermal, really commanded military superiority in the field. And that's changed a lot. Now there's a lot of things happening as the technology's changed. But what's so cool about the way it works is, we have these sensors that can detect all sorts of things. But the problem is infrared is not the most high intensity light source, right? It's actually one of the worst ones, because your visible light will excite the sensor a lot more. So they invented, or somebody just discovered, that you can use germanium, which is a kind of rare element, and you make it into a lens and it blocks everything but infrared. So essentially what thermal works at its core is it blocks everything that's in the electromagnetic light spectrum except for infrared. And the infrared hits the sensor then detects it, and then you use computer algorithms and all the technology to make that image as good as possible, with get out the noise and all this cool stuff. And we created that in an image in a micro display, typically inside a rifle scope or a handheld device. And that hasn't changed. But in 2003, those devices were probably $10,000, $20,000 that you were using in Iraq, I'd imagine.
Yep.
and there were a few GIs that came back from the war, and they were fortunate enough, I guess, to have land and money to use those things. And so there was some of those getting in the hands of consumers. I would say that my first kind of aha moment was where some of the defense contractors started making thermal, and they were making it available for like marine use and industry. And I was using at the time, or came across Raytheon's Thermal Eye. And that, I'm trying to think what year that was. That was probably 2007, 2008. And for a while, I was distributing for them. I was not able to manufacture it. It was above our punch. And so for a while, we enjoyed it through a defense contractor that made it available to the consumer market. We did very, very well with it. So that's kind of how our first, foray into thermal actually came from a U.S. defense contractor who was trying to enter the commercial market. And those devices were, I guess they would be considered your entry level devices now, and they were probably $8,000-9,000.
Well, and from a user perspective, just to help the listener or the viewer, night vision versus thermal. One of the things that I think we all realized probably right around the same time, 2003, 2004, is those image intensification, the old school night vision that we're all familiar with, that just intensifies ambient light. So when you get someone that's moving down in thick vegetation or in a really dark room, or even some urban settings, there's not a lot of light to amplify, and so you can't see. Whereas if you have a thermal, you'll see, I don't care how thick the vegetation is, you'll see them moving around in there. And so, there are some certain significant advantages associated with thermal, which is why we're starting to see fusion of night vision and thermal together into some optics.
You're right. Without starlight at all, I squared won't work, or in intensifier based technologies. So it's, in the consumer side, starting in 2003, we're using I squared technology again that was probably based on technology that's being used by the military in the 70s and 80s, right? And we're providing devices that were $200-300 to people that go out and could see, hogs and coyotes and do all the things to do outdoors. That was really exciting. But the way we made it work well enough to get a really good quality image and get some distance out of it is we had to pair that with infrared illuminators. So we had to provide the light. They weren't sensitive as the military version, so we would use the amplification of infrared that was bouncing off objects and coming back. So in those systems, starlight and moonlight absolutely was important. When you didn't have enough of that, it's dependent on how far that infrared could pierce the night and bounce back into the device. Thermal changes that because you're not going to be limited by having, if you have total cloud cover, doesn't matter. And like to your point, the heat residue remains after something's left. So if something was bedded down, or even footprints or handprints on the wall, you can see that sometimes for 30-40 minutes after that thing left. So really cool technology.
Well, and if I can punctuate that point, I was in Alberta, Canada, and we managed to go out on a coyote hunt, and I took a coyote about 260 yards to 64 yards. And we got into this grass, and this grass is about knee high, starting to lay down, crunchy. It was kind of cold, how Alberta can be. And we're going through there, and we paced this huge field for 2-3 times, maybe spent 45 minutes looking, did not find a coyote. And in these cold temperatures, I'm imagining body heat is dropping in that critter. But happened to have a handheld thermal and scanned the area and managed to walk right up on the coyote, picked him out. And he was perfectly camouflaged, that fur against the surrounding grass he was laying in, passed away. But I wouldn't have been able to recover that animal had I not had thermals on me. And even the outfitter at that point was very impressed and surprised. I didn't use it in the hunt, but it did help in the recovery operation of that animal.
That's a great example. And you can imagine what the law enforcement and applications of that would be with finding evidence in fugitives or rescue, search and rescue. You have first responders finding people that are trapped in rooftops during floods, or, survivors from hurricanes or accidents. So there's actually quite a bit of really good humanitarian use of the products as well.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
one thing I've noticed is you mentioned about that IR emitter being a place to amplify, uh, light in completely dark spaces. But you guys managed to really streamline the appearance and aesthetics of these optics, make them very functional. I love the fact that when you get a Thermion uh, s- scope now, it actually comes with an ADM mount. It's very easy to integrate it on an existing rifle system. I've used it personally to shoot coyotes locally, but I've also gone to Florida and gone to Texas and hog hunt with it. Um, it's excellent, and it's not difficult to zero now. And there are so many functions in these scopes now. You almost have to
Yeah.
become super familiar with what you have in front of you. I mean, you've got a laser rangefinder, which addresses the issue of determining an animal's distance. And let me interrupt here, but one time I was thinking I was watching hogs in Texas. They turned out to be cattle, and had it not been for that onboard laser rangefinder, I wouldn't have been able to discern the
All right.
distance to understand the size relationship of that critter. So thank you for
Yeah.
integrating the rangefinder feature in
Well,
there. But you've also got video
yeah.
recording and incredible storage now. I don't know how you can jam more technology in a single product
Oh,
than you
we're
do these
working on it.
Thermions.
We are working on it. We're always working to make it better. But you jumped 20 years in the future from 2003.
Yeah,
It's amazing how the technology has transformed. The decision for us to actually get involved in, you mentioned the ergonomics and the technology changed. In 2003, we started with the idea of making it more ergonomical. So we want to be clunky, ugly, chunks of metal or whatever. We decided to make something really sexy, and we want to make it fun to use and easy to operate. So originally it was aesthetics, but we took these devices out. And we were in our engineering area, and we had these products. We're looking at it, and we're assembling them, and we're looking at it. It's like, man, there's so much more that we could do with this. There's so much, opportunity to make these better. And one of the first things that we started playing with early was digital sensors. So which became the commercialization in the way that we were able to drive the prices down. So we were using silicon-based sensors and digital night vision for years, and they use the same. You have a lens, you have a sensor, you have a processing element, software, whatever that's running it, and then you have a micro display. Well, guess what? The only difference really is that you have to filter out all the visible light, or the other spectrums, folks in the infrared. So the adoption of the digital night vision that we did, which was really a popularization of the technology that got away from the intensifier tube monopoly that Russia had on the consumer market, was the digital effort. We led that, and it was really great to see the transformation, to Western controlled technologies. And then when we the first decision to make thermal was actually a little bit controversial. People were concerned that thermal was going to be too expensive and prices would never be, people wouldn't accept the technology, because you got to remember, the first thermal, you could detect this heat, but you didn't have the resolution, and the algorithms weren't where they were to really get the most out of the device yet. So those early devices, you'd see heat source, and to your point, the handhelds, you would look at something, you wouldn't know what distance it was. Was it a hog 50 feet away, or was it a cow 500 yards away? I mean, it was really hard to know. So when we got to the point where the resolution and displays got good, where you could start discerning between what things were, that's really when we decided it was ready for the rifle scope. So we weren't the first to adapt it into the consumer market for rifle scopes. Another company did that before us, but we waited until we thought that the technology was ready. And when we did that, we came out with a product called the Apex, which is Pulsar Apex. I still, to this day, that's like my favorite. I know it's not the most advanced. I know make better night vision now, but that always has a place in my heart, because that was like the first rifle scope. I went through the rounds with it, took out in the field, just had joy. It was like being a kid again. The joy of shooting. That was that product that made me fall in love with thermal rifle scopes, and we've been inventing and improving them since. So it's been quite a journey. And with the integration of the rangefinder, and then you have ballistics now, where you can put in your different ammo that you're using, a caliber that you're using, and then that will give a better indication for shooting at distance. So now, where it used to be, you would never engage, as a civilian an animal, hunting an animal less than like 70, 80 yards way back in the beginning. Now people are successfully hitting hogs at several hundred yards because they have the ballistics, they have the optics, they have the clarity. It's just really cool to see how far the technology has gone.
Hey, Tom, how about you, sir? Do you have any recent experience as an outdoorsman now that you're out of the military?
Yeah, in fact, this was a few years ago, and I think this is also helpful to the viewer, the follower of the podcast. I was at a media event with a thermal manufacturer, and the gentleman who was leading the conversation, he said, I've been working at this company for 13 years, and he says when I started 13 years ago, our cutting edge kind of consumer grade product cost $17,000. And he goes, the thermal camera that'll clip onto your iPhone in the swag bag has the same capabilities as that system did 13 years ago. And so, conversation exploded from there. And he talked about how, think about thermals as like personal computers, right? As the manufacturing improves and the chips get smaller and more powerful, all of that can be incorporated into a thermal and not so much with the old school image intensifier, like your traditional night vision. And so that's why we're seeing such powerful thermals, and they get more powerful and the prices continue to come down. And one of the things I love about the companies that you have, James, is, the chips that you use, those are all European manufactured systems. It's not, it's not bargain basement stuff from the lowest. So you're using quality components and leveraging all of these technological advances from advanced countries.
You're right, and I think that's important. And any opportunity we have to make things in the United States, we do. Unfortunately, some of these things are just not available that allow that price point in the U.S. But yeah, we make things like UK components. We assemble things in UK, Lithuania, Latvia, French have some really great technology that we use. I don't know if people like the French these days, but they make some great technology still.
They're like the highly talented but annoying cousin, right? The French.
So it is a very global effort. And one of the things that I think is important, because we talked about the origins of this technology. When you guys were using the field, you dominated the field. You didn't have other challengers, and we do have to be cognizant that the world is a dangerous place now, and some of this technology is being developed in places that aren't as friendly. So some of our biggest competitors now are actually close to associated with government controlled entities in China. So that's a problem. So obviously we have I don't know much about how much this is public, but we tried our best to stay away from government owned and controlled companies to do business with. We like entrepreneurs and people that are trying to innovate and create. And then as much as possible, we want to control and develop the technology ourselves. So, here in our facilities in Texas, we have an amazing engineering team. Some of the guys that were first breaking these apart say there's a better way. When we first talked about it, the people in Europe and Russia were like, Americans can't do this. It's got to be Europe. Well, I can tell you right now, Americans have made some amazing contributions, inventions in the space and technology. And you talked about one, the Dark 30 is a brand new high tech. It is the premium night vision device, and that was developed here in Texas. So I'm really proud about the accomplishments with that.
Well, that's a great segue. Let's talk a little bit about the Dark 30, if you don't mind me jumping over to it. I'm still looking forward to the chance to getting one of these samples and trying it out for myself. But at the 2025 NSSF SHOT Show in Las Vegas, I got a chance to really go through it deep in one of your displays and booths outside. I see this Dark 30. It's basically like a pod you would mount on a vehicle or an ATV, a side-by-side, if you will. So a lot of landowners have potential interest in this, and you can remotely control 360-degree view, if I'm not mistaken. And,
have you seen it? You used it? Because it sounds like
I've used it on the show.
Okay.
Yeah,
not in the field. Not in a hunting situation, but it's really interesting to me, because a lot of times when you're in the dark, I'm running around Florida and I'm looking for hogs out there, but 360 degrees, I have no idea exactly where to start looking. This will help point me in the right direction. And
Yep.
it's a lot of fun, especially for the passengers in the vehicle to operate with you.
Yeah, it's culmination of all the experience, the decades of time that we put into learning the technology and evolving it. We really wanted to make the premier top dog in the thermal space with the Dart 30, and that's the position that's in, and based on our folks in Texas designing and developing the technology. Kind of funny story though, as the guys, as the founder, I don't do as much the hand-on work anymore, and I don't. I have a patent or two in my name back in the day, but they don't let me in the engineering office anymore. So, I would go in there like, when is this going to hit the market? It's so cool. I can't wait to see it. And it just takes time. And, they obsessed to make it perfect and right. So they got the first working prototype and they handed it to me and they said, okay, you take this to the Sellmark Ranch and see what you think. And we decided to use it to do our deer counts. We still spotlighted and counted it the official methodology, but we saw like three times more deer than you'd ever even notice if you're just spotlighting and driving around. We were literally looking at a few deer in the front, and then this thing swivels and does 360 scans. There's deer all over the place that you would totally miss. And if you had a floodlight, it'll hit the trees and brush and you won't see what's past it. This would pierce down into the trees far away and just allow you to see so many more animals. And anyway, I loved it. The remote control is so cool. You drive it around, you want to see what's behind you, to the right, left, it's really neat.
Right.
And the people in your vehicle can see what you're seeing. Typically thermal, you have to get outside the truck. Well, you have to get outside of the truck with thermal if the windows are up because glass acts as an insulator. So thermal, this now allows you to drive a car, windows up. It could be 10 degrees outside, it could be below zero, and you're still comfortable and you can scout and see everything. And then you can get out and engage, when you find the group you're trying to hunt on. Or if you, even for livestock, seeing if the animals are calving or what's happening, it's just such a great tool. But I'll say one thing, when I was doing the deer count, it was summer in Texas. And again, great thermal works well in the summer, but it's the most challenging environment. And, being a prototype, I was worried about leaving out in the Texas sun. So I decided to park it in the garage, but I have a low hanging garage and I hit that thing full speed. And was so awesome when we mounted it. It was mounted. Yeah. Wasn't it great? But the great story is it was magnetically mounted on top of the UTV I was using. It knocked it off the UTV and cables and stuff got disconnected and everything. And it landed on the dirt. And anyway, didn't do any damage to my garage, didn't damage the unit other than scuff marks and on the unit, which is funny because they took that prototype and they shot the initial videos. If you get close and you can see, like, why does this look like this has been just torn up? That was caused by me and my first time testing the unit. So it worked really well. It's really durable. And it was probably, again, it's those moments where you just have just amazing experience, seeing amazing things. And then, I don't know, there's times where you go hunting and you're outdoors and you have this great moment that you remember forever. That's right. What that was like for me. And just a lot of fun.
So obviously this all leads me to my final question here, but where does this technology end up going? Where is there room to expand it? Not only the Dart 30, but the Thermion series. This year you introduced the Thermion 2 laser rangefinder LRF XL60, meaning you've got more field of view. Just expanding it more. Where can we go? You've got that onboard technology that also now we can pair it with smart devices and someone can be witnessing your shot as you're making the decision to shoot. And they're part of the experience.
You're right. Man, there's so much technology on there. A lot of people don't even use it. The image capture, the share of the video, the streaming, a lot going on. With Dart 30, I can tell you we have several concepts in the works, and it's all going in areas the current market's lacking. So we're looking for things that are applications that haven't found the right solution yet, or maybe the problem with engineering design of optics is it's a trade-off. So it's getting that right balance. Like you can make a lot more magnification so you can see objects closer, but that could cause pixelation. It could cause your optic. It could cause a smaller field of view. So everything you do in optics gives and takes. There's just not like one perfect solution. So some of the things we're working on is like, how do we create that perfect solution in the application that people really want, right? So if you're in Texas or Georgia or Mississippi or Louisiana, where you're in thick forests and you that's a different type of hunting than you're up in the Dakotas, and
Right.
you're shooting coyotes at extraordinary distances, or you're shooting at 20 degrees below zero and 35-mile-an-hour winds. It's way different than if you're shooting at 120-degree Texas weather. So we have to design those scopes to optimize those things for those applications. And we know that people are doing more things for vehicles. We know there's great marine applications. So we see the things that we developed that we thought originally were going to be great for hunting and shooting and like wildlife management. Well, we also found out that the fire departments want it, the law enforcement teams want it, but they want it slightly differently, and they want things to they care more about certain things than others. So we have to go back and we make that happen for them. I do think there is going to be some changes, I hope, in the availability of the lenses. The lenses are a bottleneck for us currently. It's one of the big cost drivers. So until we figure that out, the cost probably won't be able to come down much more, because the electronics components getting cheaper, but the rare earth minerals and materials, we don't have enough of them in the United States, in the West. So we're stuck with that until we can figure out a breakthrough. And we have a few things that we're testing. Can't talk too much about it, but hopefully one of those will become the next breakthrough that will allow us to do even more things. Like you're talking about the integration of visible and kind of I-square stuff as well as thermal. There's that, and I think that just needs a lot of refinement. And I think that software and the technology is going to help make that happen. So it's good questions. Well, it sounds like we need to get you guys out at the ranch so you can get hands-on and all these things in the hunting environment. Let you take a big Texas boar and experience it firsthand.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
Sign me up.
Open invite. You guys let me know when. We'd love to see you there.
Okay.
All right. Well, hey,
thank you.
James, thank you so much for joining us today, and appreciate your help, Tom, in conducting this interview. He's obviously our rifle and optics editor, so more plugged into what the industry is doing than anyone I know. But James, you're an inspiration to entrepreneurs out there, and what a guy in his garage can do. I love looking over your portfolio of companies, and we just really focused on two of them today, really, Pulsar and Dark 30, but we could have you back on and talk about scopes and lights and other things.
I love that.
So,
anytime.
Yeah, please join us again. So
I would love to be back.
Again, James.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Tom. Good seeing you guys, and I hope to see you in the field in Texas as soon as you can.